the mummies. You may or may not need to be doing it at this point, changing the salt. My salt on my mummies, one of them it's kind of hard and crunchy. The other one it's not. So I'm just gonna do them both because it's not gonna hurt it to change the salt early. But if you have like any indication of liquid or if it's getting hard and crunchy, the salt, you probably do want to change it out. If you can't make the meeting at 2:30 today, that's okay. I'm going to record it so that you can go back and check it out within the Chicken Mummies folder. All right. So anyways, if it's hard and crunchy, I would probably still change it. But if it doesn't feel hard and crunchy, if there's no sign of liquids, if you want it to go a little bit longer, you can. Just know that you are going to eventually want to change that salt, and it might not line up with when I'm doing it, if that makes sense.
What if it's moist and tacky?
Yeah, change it. Okay. The Kingdom of Kush, or Nubia, if you're from Egypt. All right, so Kush is south of Egypt. And like I've been saying, the Egyptians always called them Nubia. And they called them Nubia because it was known for having tons and tons of gold, the metal of the gods, the divine metal. And so for all of Egypt's history, they are going to be very interested in Kush. They are going to be very interested in either trading them so they can get their gold or controlling them. And it's kind of cool. We get a little knowledge of Egyptian language here because Nub is gold. So when you see Nubia, it literally means land of gold, which I think is pretty cool. Now, Kush is in a really, really good location. So they've got the Nile River. They are in the savannah, so they're south of the deserts, and they're pretty close to the Red Sea. So Kush is naturally going to be in a trade location because they can use the Nile River, they can use the Red Sea, they can use the trade routes that are on the plains of the savannah. So it's going to wind up being pretty advantageous for Kush to have its location. And because really, when you look at where Kush is going to be connecting Central Africa, South Africa, and really, if you really go out West Africa to Egypt. So Egypt is isolated from the rest of Africa because of all the deserts. And it's one of the unique things about Egypt, how it's an African country, but it's also an Arab country, whereas the rest of Egypt, or excuse me, the rest of Africa is very African. And so we're going to see why there are such differences, but Nubia is going to be that place that can connect the world of Egypt to the world of Africa. So as I've been saying, all along this time, the Egyptians have been trading with Kush. It's a little bit difficult because of the cataracts, so they're going to have to get around those. But really, the cataract didn't make it impossible. It just made it harder to have large amounts of soldiers and things going there. And basically, you're not going to need to know what the Egyptians gave them, but the Egyptian products that Kush was interested, they were interested in grain because the Egyptians could farm so much. Some of that grain was turned into beer, which I know you guys probably think is silly that was a big trade good, but it really was because that was something that people often needed because water could have bacteria, whereas the little bit of alcohol within the beer would kill that bacteria, so it was actually safe to drink. It traveled better than water, and also the linens that the Egyptians created. Whereas Kush, the most important thing that the Egyptian wanted was gold, but because they're on the savannah, they have the ivory from the elephants, which was a very prized possession. Leather from the animals, because once again, there's going to be way more animals in Kush than there are in Egypt. Timber, because let's face it, Egypt has very few trees, and we know they needed the trees for the trade along the Nile River, and they would also trade slaves. And like I said, I'm never going to be asking you what place had what trade goods, but it is interesting and good for us to understand why and what is happening here. Now, a lot of you guys picked this up on the Do Now, how having a powerful neighbor could be good if you're friendly. It could be bad if you're unfriendly. We're going to see that Egypt and Kush are going to fight a lot. A lot, a lot, a lot. And they're going to almost develop like a older brother, little brother, or big sister, little sister kind of relationship where, Kush is going to wind up having to often deal with the troubles of their older sibling, but then also kind of looks up to them at the same time. One of the things that happened is, and I hope this hasn't happened to you, where hopefully your older siblings aren't being bullies and make you give them their Halloween candy or anything like that you just had. But there were times when the people of Kush had to give gifts to the Egyptians so that the Egyptians don't beat them up anymore. But sometimes the Egyptians, they were actually pretty kind to the people of Kush and they got along well. You don't have to write these, of course, what the gifts were. I did find it interesting that the Egyptians, much like us, like to have zoos and things like that. And so the Egyptians were just as amazed when they saw elephants and, monkeys and giraffes than when, people today still love to go see those kind of things. I always think that's pretty cool. But one of the things we're going to realize is that the more and more Egypt and Kush interact, the more and more Kush is going to start acting like Egypt. And you have to know that Kush became Egyptianized, meaning they became just like the Egyptians. Examples of this are that the people of Kush, they didn't speak their own language. They spoke Egyptian. They wrote in Egyptian. They stopped worshiping their gods and goddesses and worshiped the Egyptian pantheon. Oops. Didn't mean to switch it that fast. My apologies. So yeah, I'm like Riley. I'm sleepy today too. I don't know why. I think like 2 nights ago I didn't get much sleep and now it's caught up to me. All right. Awesome. The people of Kush dressed like Egyptians. And when they're getting along, the people of Kush fought for the Egyptian army. The people of Kush were way better with archery, which kind of makes sense because they're on the savannah. They're going and hunting and doing all those things where the Egyptians didn't do very much hunting. And so the Kushite archers, people use bows and arrows, they're going to wind up going and fighting in their army. If you don't know what an archer is, that's what it is. If you know what an archer is, you don't have to write that down, obviously. Another thing that we can see is that the people of Kush obviously looked up to Egypt because you can see with who they send their princes to, or where they send their princes to be educated. So they get an Egyptian education. So we see that the people of Kush are completely wrapped up with Egypt. The people of Kush, they are essentially Egyptians. They speak like them, they look like them, they talk like them, they worship the same gods, they do the same. And here's one of the things. The new kingdom of Egypt, like we talked about, controlled Kush, they ruled them, they conquered them. So you'd think when Kush, when Egypt ends, the new kingdom ends, you think Kush would be mad and break free, but they keep the Egyptian culture. Because to them, it was as if it was their culture. So we see the people of Kush still act Egyptian. And that's always, I feel, very interesting how even though the people of Egypt beat up Kush, even though the people of Egypt took things from Kush, when Egypt is gone, Kush stays like Egypt. And we're going to see something very interesting tomorrow with what's going to happen with this relationship. All right. I am stopping the recording.